Some regions are measured by their skylines, others by their deserts. The Pacific Northwest refuses to be confined by either. It dissolves the line between land and weather. A single valley here catches more rain than deserts see in a decade. Trees rise taller than towers, older than nations. Wolves gone 70 years have simply walked back in. By any logic, this place should be empty. Yet here they are, timing errands to tide charts, chasing sunbreaks like weather is rumor. The question isn't whether people can live at the rainforest's edge. It's what they've learned out there that we haven't. It occupies America's upper left shoulder, spilling into British Columbia along 700 miles of coast. Mountains trapping Pacific storms and wringing them dry. Nearly empty of people strip away the interstates and the coffee shops. And the western edge of Washington and Oregon is, geographically, roughly the size of England, and yet outside of Seattle and Portland sprawl, entire counties along the coast hold fewer people than a single London borough. No billboards interrupt the tree line for 50 miles at a stretch along Highway 101. No cell service in long patches. No chain hotels in towns that have existed since the 1850s. The region's defining settlement pattern isn't a city. It's a scatter of small, isolated towns strung along the coast like beads that never quite touch, each one separated from the next by miles of temperate rainforest so dense it swallows sound. Take Forks, Washington, a town of barely 3,000 people pressed against the western flank of the Olympic Mountains. It was founded in the 1870s by loggers who named it for the convergence of three rivers nearby: the Bogakeel, the Kalawa, and the Solduk. A practical, unglamorous name for a town that would go on to become one of the wettest inhabited places in the continental United States, drawing over 100 inches of rain most years. There is nothing legally unusual about Forks itself, but drive 20 minutes west and the roads run straight into the boundary of the Kiluti Indian Reservation. A sovereign nation with its own laws, its own fishing rights protected by treaty since 1855, existing as a distinct legal territory inside American soil. The landscape around all of it does the real talking. Drive the coastal highway at dusk, and the forest doesn't so much border the road as lean over it. Sitka spruce and western hemlock rising in ragged, moss-draped columns, their canopies knitting together so tightly that daylight arrives in the underused Pacific Northwest, a private show of light and shadow. Fog doesn't roll in here so much as it simply never fully leaves, pooling in the river valleys at dawn, dragging itself back up the hillsides by noon, a landscape perpetually caught mid-exhale. If you're watching this from somewhere with actual sunshine right now, drop a comment and tell us what season it is where you are. We're curious how far the grey extends. Two or three blocks that make up the working centre of a coastal northwest town and you'll notice the buildings are arguing with the climate before you've even parked the car. Roofs pitch steep and overhang wide, less for style than survival, a design choice repeated for over a century because anything flatter collects moss, then rot, then collapse. Wood siding is left to weather to grey, rather than fight it with fresh paint every few years. Even new construction is built assuming it will look a decade older within one winter. It is architecture as a kind of surrender, and also a kind of respect. What's absent tells you as much as what's there. No stoplights in most of these towns. A single blinking yellow light suffices for an entire commercial district. No big box stores within an hour's drive in many cases. Residents plan grocery runs the way city dwellers plan vacations, stocking up for weeks at a time. Crime, beyond the ordinary friction of small-town life, is negligible enough that many houses along the coast still don't bother locking their doors. There is no traffic in the way the rest of the country understands traffic. The closest thing is a logging truck, and everyone simply waits. The people who end up staying are, by nature, self-selecting. 6 straight months of rain and early darkness is not a lifestyle that survives ambivalence. Either you find something in it, or you leave within a year or two, and almost everyone here will tell you they've watched that exact departure happen to a neighbor. What remains is a population disproportionately made up of fishermen, loggers turned conservationists, retired Coast Guard, artists drawn to the particular quality of grey light, and a scattering of people who simply wanted to be left alone by the rest of the country. Not just tolerance for solitude, but a genuine appetite for it. That's the baseline personality trait of a coastal northwest town. There are more black bears in some Olympic Peninsula counties than there are year-round human residents. And locals have adjusted their daily habits accordingly. Garbage goes out the morning of pickup, never the night before, and it's considered common sense, not paranoia, to make noise while walking wooded trails at dusk. Roosevelt elk, the largest subspecies of elk in North America, move through backyards and along riverbanks in herds of 100 or more, unbothered by fences that were never built to stop something that size. Offshore, the water tells its own story. The Salish Sea, the network of straits and inlets separating Washington from Vancouver Island, is home to resident pods of orca that locals can identify individually, by name, from their dorsal fin shapes alone. A level of familiarity that would be extraordinary anywhere else and is simply neighborly knowledge here. Grey whales pass through on one of the longest mammal migrations on Earth, a round trip of roughly 10,000 miles between the Arctic and Mexico's breeding lagoons. Close enough to shore in spring that whale watching requires no boat at all, just a headland and a pair of binoculars. Inland, the forest floor moves too, if you're patient. Banana slugs, some the length of a hand, are treated less as pests and more as an unofficial regional mascot. One Northwest university adopted the creature as its team name, embracing rather than hiding from the sheer glistening strangeness of the place. Overhead, the northern spotted owl, a bird whose habitat needs would eventually reshape federal forestry policy, still nests in the oldest surviving stands of timber, a quiet reminder that some residents here have talons and no interest whatsoever in anyone's opinion of them. There is a particular kind of disorientation that only sets in around the fourth consecutive week of rain. When the sun hasn't been seen in any meaningful way and the light itself seems to have thinned into something perpetually dusk-colored. In the deepest pockets of the Olympic rainforest, some valleys log over 140 inches of precipitation a year. Among the highest totals anywhere in the continental United States, and even towns along the drier stretches of coast rarely see more than a handful of fully clear days between November and March. For newcomers, the effect is disorienting in a way that has little to do with temperature and everything to do with time. Days blur together without the punctuation of sunlight, and locals will admit, if pressed, that the fifth or sixth grey week of a winter can weigh on a person in ways that are hard to name. What develops instead is a set of small, almost ritual adaptations. Homes are built with more windows than seems logical for a place with so little sun, chasing every available lumen. Many residents structure entire days around a sunbreak, a brief, unpredictable window of clear sky that can appear with almost no warning and vanish within the hour. Dropping whatever they're doing to sit outside, run an errand, simply stand in it. Rain gear stops being a garment and becomes something closer to a second skin. Visitors are easily spotted by the umbrellas they still, stubbornly, carry. And then, almost without exception, residents describe a reward on the far side of the hardship that surprises even them. The rain, they'll say, produces a particular kind of quiet, not silence exactly, but a hush, water on cedar needles, water on moss. A sound that becomes strangely restorative rather than oppressive once you stop resisting it. Between the deep grey of winter and the brief, brilliant clarity of a northwest summer sits a shoulder season locals call the June gloom's cousin. A stretch of low marine cloud that burns off by early afternoon almost every day, delivering just enough blue sky to keep the whole region hanging on until July, when the sky for a few unbroken months simply opens. There is a category of forest so rare that only a handful of true examples remain on the planet. And a disproportionate share of what's left grows here, along this single stretch of American coastline. Unlike tropical rainforests, temperate rainforests require a narrow, specific combination of cool temperatures and relentless year-round moisture that exists in only a few pockets worldwide. Coastal Chile, a sliver of New Zealand, patches of the British Isles, and the Pacific Northwest, whose Olympic Peninsula holds some of the largest intact examples anywhere on Earth. That rarity has made the region a genuine hub of botanical and ecological research for over a century, drawing scientists studying old-growth canopy ecosystems that took root here before European contact and, in some individual trees, before the founding of Rome. It has also made the region a case study in a different kind of history. The 20th century fight over how or whether to log a forest this ancient, a dispute that pitted logging towns against conservationists and eventually reshaped federal land policy nationwide, with the region's own spotted owl becoming an unlikely symbol in courtrooms far from any forest. What does a forest owe the world simply by continuing to exist? What is lost, and what survives? When a landscape this old becomes a bargaining chip in a policy fight decided thousands of miles away, the region has never fully answered either question, and perhaps was never going to. Some trees here were already centuries old when the first ships arrived. They are still standing. At the mouth of the Columbia River, where one of the largest rivers in North America finally surrenders itself to the open Pacific, stands Cape Disappointment Lighthouse, the oldest operating lighthouse on the West Coast, first lit in 1856. Built to warn ships away from a stretch of water so treacherous, it has claimed roughly 2,000 vessels over the centuries and earned the nickname the Graveyard of the Pacific. It exists precisely here because nowhere else on this coastline demanded it more. The collision of river current and ocean swell at the Columbia's mouth produces some of the most dangerous bar crossings in the world. A hazard serious enough that a specialized Coast Guard motor lifeboat school still trains here in deliberately rough water, because nowhere else offers conditions this unforgiving to practice in. The Cape carries a second layer of meaning that has nothing to do with shipwrecks. It was here. In November 1805, that the Lewis and Clark expedition finally reached the Pacific after 18 months of overland travel. Close enough that expedition member William Clark could carve his own name into a nearby tree. A real documented moment that turned this exact headland into the symbolic full stop of America's first transcontinental crossing. Locals regard the lighthouse with a quiet, unfussy pride rather than tourist brochure enthusiasm. It is simply understood as the place where the country runs out, where a river that drains 1/3 of a million square miles finally gives up its name to something larger. Fishermen still watch its beam from the water. Everyone else mostly just knows it's there. "20 minutes past the last gas station in Forks, past a stretch of highway with no cell signal, the road ends, quite literally, at La Push. A village of a few hundred people that also happens to be the seat of the Quileute Nation. A sovereign tribal government whose treaty rights predate the state of Washington itself. Most visitors driving the Olympic Peninsula's loop highway never see it. It sits on a dead-end spur, deliberately or accidentally overlooked by a road system built around logging routes rather than tribal geography. The contrast, once you arrive, is immediate. A reservation general store sits a short walk from beaches strewn with driftwood the size of felled buildings. Sea stacks rising out of the surf like the last standing pillars of something older. The Quileute language, one of the rarest in North America, with a vanishingly small number of fluent speakers, is taught in the tribal school alongside ordinary math and reading. An old world and a very current one, side by side, without much fanfare about it either way. The tension here is real and largely unresolved. A tribe whose ancestral territory once stretched across a much larger stretch of coastline was, over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries, confined to a fraction of it, and later found even that remaining land vulnerable to rising seas and flooding, forcing an ongoing, difficult relocation of the village school and key buildings to higher ground. It is not a story with a tidy ending, and residents don't pretend it is one, just a place that keeps adapting, deliberately on its own terms. Largely outside the notice of the highway that forgot to properly reach it. The jagged, glacier-carved peaks at the heart of the Olympic Peninsula are, geologically speaking, strange even by mountain standards. They were formed not by the usual collision of continental plates, but by a slab of ancient seafloor that was scraped upward and folded onto itself as oceanic crust dove beneath the continent millions of years ago. That origin is why the range's rock is so often marine in character. Riddled with fossils of ancient sea creatures found, improbably, near mountain summits thousands of feet above today's coastline. Glaciers still cap several of the range's highest peaks, moving and reshaping the terrain the way glaciers always have. Grinding valleys into the distinctive U-shapes visible from nearly any coastal viewpoint. A permanent, ordinary feature of a mountain range this shape and this latitude, not a sign of anything unusual happening to the world at large. The rivers that drain those glaciers carry a fine rock flour that turns some of the peninsula's lakes a startling, opaque turquoise, a color residents point out to visitors with the same casual pride they'd use describing a favorite local restaurant. For the people who live in its shadow, the range functions less as scenery than as a kind of clock and compass both. Fishermen judge the season by snowpack on specific peaks visible from the water. Hikers measure a summer by which high trails have finally melted clear. Longtime residents describe an almost bodily familiarity with these mountains. Not admiration from a distance, but the specific accumulated knowledge of someone who has watched the same ridgeline change light 1,000 times and still isn't tired of it. Feeding a household on this coast has always required a different kind of planning than a city grocery run allows. The nearest full supermarket can sit 45 minutes or more from the smaller coastal towns, so pantries here are built for endurance, chest freezers stocked deep with salmon and venison. Root cellars still in regular use, an instinctive habit of buying in bulk that has less to do with frugality than with genuine logistics. Running out of something on a Tuesday night here isn't a minor inconvenience. It's a planning failure people actively work to avoid. What the region lacks in convenience, it makes up for at the water's edge. Dungeness crab, named for a nearby spit of land, remains a defining local catch, pulled from cold coastal waters and served with little more than butter, because the meat needs no help. Salmon, chinook, coho, sockeye, each with its own season and its own fiercely defended run. Anchors both the commercial fishing economy and, for the region's tribal nations, a set of treaty-protected fishing rights fought for and upheld through decades of legal battles. Foraging is not a hobby here so much as a quiet second economy. Chanterelle and matsutake mushrooms gathered from the forest floor each fall. Wild blackberries stripped from roadside brambles every August by anyone with a bucket and 5 free minutes. Given the isolation, the sophistication of the food scene along this coast catches most outsiders off guard. Small-town restaurants turning out oyster preparations that would hold their own in a much larger city. A direct byproduct of ingredients, this fresh needing very little disguise. And when the salmon run particularly well, or a fishing boat comes back with more crab than one family can use, it rarely stays within a single household for long informal networks of sharing. A cooler left on a neighbor's porch, a standing rule that nobody who wants salmon in season should have to buy it. Treat food less as private property than as something the community simply moves through together.